Okay, so the next topic is new housing types. One of the big changes with CodeSMTX is that we have introduced this new tool in our code that are called housing types. What housing types do is they allow us to regulate the types of housing, or and it's actually building types more generally, is that they allow us to regulate our zoning districts now, regulate the intensity of the development, and your building types regulate the different types of buildings that can go at that level of intensity. So it provides this extra tool to regulate development so that we know that a multifamily building is not the same when it's at a small scale and it's actually represented as a duplex. So we have places that are zoned to MF24, but because of the size of the lot, they end up being a duplex. Well, that's different. That's something that's appropriate on a lower intensity zoning scale, whereas MF24 that's on a MF24 that's a big apartment complex would be at a different zoning intensity scale. So zoning districts measure the intensity, and building types measure the types of uses or types of buildings that can be built within that zoning district. So it's an additional tool. What we heard in people looking at these different housing types and different building types are that we really do need to accommodate the need for diverse housing for residents and families in existing neighborhoods. Diverse housing types, however, are not appropriate in areas that are reserved for single family, that are already single family and predominantly single family. Those stay that way. There's no reason to introduce new zoning districts or new types of zoning because they're already functioning with one type of housing, right? A single type of housing is within a big block of area. You don't need a zoning district that represents or recognizes a mixture in housing types because there's not a mixture. It's one type. When you get into some of the stuff that we already have on the ground, places like North Street, a lot of other places, think of them, in your community, in your neighborhood, where you already have a mixture of housing types. Right now, what that looks like on your zoning map is a whole bunch of different colors, because each one, that duplex is zoned different from the townhouse, is zoned different from the single family, is zoned different from the small multifamily triplex. Each one is zoned different from the mixed use, from the neighborhood commercial. Each one of those has a different zoning district. So you have this multicolored map. That is not a very good predictable environment for what can happen. When somebody walks into that environment and purchases a lot, they don't know what it's supposed to be. Next door to me, I have a duplex zoning. Over here, I have townhouse. Over here, I have MF24. Over here, I have single family. So that type of zoning doesn't work well for those areas where you have a mixture in housing types already. So that's what this tool is in place for, is to work well in those sorts of areas so that we can say, yes, 3 townhouses together is appropriate in this area because it's at this smaller scale. But 10 that are 3 stories tall, just because they're a townhouse, doesn't mean they're appropriate. So being able to have that additional level of regulation is really what housing types give us. So some of the key considerations: housing choice. That's really important. That's something that we heard a lot. What have we seen in terms of new development in San Marcos over the past years? We've seen either single-family detached houses or big multi-family development. And we haven't seen apartments, and we haven't seen anything in between. We know that, looking at national trends, there's about 20% of the people out there that are looking for housing would like to see something in between. Most people do want single-family detached or apartments. But there's about 20% that want something in between, and that's that ability to offer housing choice. Our current codes have very little ability to offer people housing choice, or those housing products, some people refer to them as missing middle. So those things that are in between a big apartment and a small single-family detached structure. So that's one of the things that we've looked at in the ability to write our codes to facilitate that type of thing in areas where it's appropriate. So that's medium density housing. And one of the big things that we looked at is particularly in preferred development areas where we're saying, let's put people in these areas and have more dense based on the comprehensive plan. We want to make sure that our codes are, in those areas, removing some of the barriers to medium density housing. One of the reasons we don't see a lot of it is that it is a little more difficult to build. It's very refined. You've got to have everything just right. It's a little bit more difficult to put on the ground. You know, it's not what people are used to, from banks to zoning codes to everything in between. So in order to see that, we've really looked at, in those preferred development areas, we have what are called character districts. Those are the areas where we've really tried to remove a lot of the barriers to medium density housing, whereas in existing neighborhoods, we've still wanted to make sure to maintain the character that are in existing neighborhoods. So there's a lot more regulations and stricter requirements for that diverse housing, types of housing in existing neighborhoods. So that goes along. These are the proposed strategies, is a place-based zoning. So essentially just what I was talking about is that we've created and been able to really refine zoning districts for different types of places. And so when we look at our comprehensive plan and it says these places should look and feel and act like this, we've got zoning districts that can accommodate that. They're not just, you know, the comprehensive plan doesn't say this area should be all duplexes. No, it says that it should look and feel and act like this. And so if all we have in our toolbox is a duplex zoning or a townhouse zoning, we can't make that place and feel look like the zoning district that it is. So that's place-based zoning. Again, we have different types of neighborhoods, different types of zoning districts for preferred development areas, which are character districts, and then different types of zoning districts in existing neighborhoods, which are neighborhood districts, that both reflect the character of the places that they either are right now or that our comp plan wants them to become. So character districts are areas of change, preferred development areas, existing neighborhoods stay the same. And then the last thing is that building types, in addition to acting as a regulatory tool, they also really provide guidance. They show people, look, I can do more than just your conventional types of housing. Here's how it could look. Provide options like sometimes the best form of a duplex is not a side-by-side with, you know, parking all in the front. Sometimes the best form of a duplex that looks the best and works the best in a neighborhood is back to front, or you know, or maybe they're separated, maybe they're not attached. And so this code helps to provide that guidance. As there's a lot of different ways to do a duplex. You don't just have to do it side by side in order for it to be a duplex. It's 2-unit living, it's 2 families on a lot. Why does it matter if they're side by side? So that sort of thing that we're able to do with those building types. And I will pass it over now.
So again, the question that y'all want to be thinking about, what do you want to see the new code do to address this topic? So one comment for sticky, start with a verb. I'm going to actually start on this. Cottage court. These could quickly turn into sagewood. What prevents this? Must show exactly what type of housing is allowed in each neighborhood or district. ways zoning districts are initiated? What about current restrictions on unrelated in SF now, in ND or CD areas, question mark. The city needs to provide parking if city is going to reduce parking requirements. When will character studies be published? Okay, want to start with that one, Abby? Because that one's kind of a, do you want to address the when will the character studies be published? I'll grab more of the comments.
All right, so character studies, those are out on our website, the results of what we heard. Predominantly though, what we heard from existing neighborhoods during these neighborhood character studies is number one, stop incompatible development in or adjacent to existing neighborhoods. So that is what we're tackling first. After the adoption of CodeSMTX and we have our tools and our regulations in place, then council can choose to go back and look at or continue to look, and we can see how is it working, and are there still problems of incompatible development based on the existing zoning that's on the ground? If there are, then we can go back and do city-initiated zoning to take those incompatible districts that are existing now and convert them to neighborhood districts. But staff is not going to be recommending, in terms of a zoning strategy, staff would be recommending that the first places that we would look at rezoning would be preferred development areas, because those are areas of change on our comprehensive plan. Those are those intensity zones. The comprehensive plan said those areas should be changed, and so that's where we would recommend looking at first if we wanted to follow and go down and look at city-initiated rezoning or remapping of different districts.
Just go over how the character districts uses and how to use and interpret this new code. Create departments of, with stores on first floor, building type for CD 5D. Prevent SF 11, SF 6 from being converted to a neighborhood district. Need to modify 4212 building types allowed by district. When can we do this in detail? So Abby, I wonder, create a purpose-built owner-occupied deed restriction for infill housing and in workforce housing. Price ranges create enhanced rental restrictions to promote family rentals. There's a lot of concepts here, so I'm very appreciative of the team organizing these. Andy, I'm wondering the one about kind of
They're pretty
recapping
consistent.
how things are working. Can you just go over the district character district's uses and how to interpret? Is that appropriate one for you to do a recap on now?
Sure. So whose was that, or does somebody want to clarify that one? Yes.
So yeah, I do want to clarify, because
my first take reading over this gives us all the things we've been asking for. But as I briefly discussed with you, it's really complicated, and there's a lot of glossing over. Go to this page to understand what this means. I was really just hoping to get out of this workshop how to actually use this code to make it more user friendly. I think that the deep discussion is really important in the particular questions. But I think until we really understand how to cross-reference to this code and really understand how to use it, the questions don't even really help me at this point.
Sure. Okay, so the question was, how do we use the code, and how will people be using it? It is a little challenging right now. You have this huge document, and your first instinct is just like with any other book to read it cover to cover, but it's pretty hard to figure out how it works, because that's not how a development code is used. Nobody ever reads it cover to cover unless you're trying to adopt a new one like this. So typically the way that it's used is that you would say, first thing you would do is you'd say, what am I zoned? and you'd go to the city website, look at the zoning map, say, okay, well, this is my zoning district, and then you'd go to that page first. You go to that page, so if you were flipping through your book now, you could say, hey, I'm zoned neighborhood district 3. And then you go through, and it's a one-page spread. And that's really and the way that the code is going to work when it's online is that all of those hyperlinks, the same way they are right now, actually, if you use the revised draft of the code in the PDF version, all of those hyperlinks are active. So where it says a section number, you click on that, and actually in MuniCode, it's really nice, because all you have to do is hover over that, and the regulations of that section pop up, so you can kind of see them and read them. So, and in the PDF version that's online right now, you click it, it takes you to that section, then you can go back to that one page again. So that's actually the best way to read it, is to say, hey, I'm zoned this. Okay, here's how big my building can be. This is how many units I can do. These are my material standards. These are my blank wall area, all of these different things. And you click the links to say, what does that mean? Oh, here it is. So that's the best way to use a code, and that's how most people will be using it. So.
Abby, thank you. So that does give us an idea if we're looking at a specific property. But if you're somebody who's looking at San Marcos to buy a home, you want to come into this community, and you're looking into neighborhoods, I mean, you can't go into each lot and do that. I mean, I just want to understand how people are going to know, when I buy a home in San Marcos, what can go in next door to me? I think that's the big question, and I think the way this is written, it's complicated, but it's good. You guys did a great job. You simplify it a little bit for us, I think, how to use it in that sense. Because that's, like you said before, that's the big problem in San Marcos, is neighborhood protection. When you invest in something, is that really what it's going to be in 5 years?
Yeah, sure.
So just for the average guy, not for people who can know how to click on this, I own this property, if I buy it, what are all the uses I can do with it? Really, if I want to invest in your neighborhood, it's what can actually happen to me once I do.
Can I tack on to that too? Okay, we had this whole situation going on before, where, we had, is it not on?
It's on, just put it right up.
Okay, where we had Midtown and Triangle and South District. And in my mind, for our citizens and for us, we should be able to go look at that area and go, okay, these are the housing types that are allowed in the core of this neighborhood. This is what's allowed at the transition and buffer area and that sort of thing, so that we know what may be built around us or next to us and that sort of thing. And I'm just not getting that from the code. I thought we were going to be seeing more of like this type stuff.
Yes, so the code is the book of regulations for the zoning districts. But the zoning districts, that is the map. That is what tells you what can go on next to you. So right now, you're showing those are some of the flyers and brochures that we put out for the different character districts, for the different intensity zones. Those are the intensity zones that were identified on the comprehensive plan. One of the things, and that's why I said that staff would be recommending, that one of the first things we do is come back and look at rezoning those areas to these new character districts. Because right now, they won't look like those brochures, because the existing zoning that's on the ground is not that. So that's the biggest thing. The only way for the property to change, the entitlements to change on a property, the only way for it to go from single family to duplex is for the city council, for a legal process to happen. And the city council, those properties are notified, 200-foot radius is notified, and the city council takes action on that. That is the only way for the zoning to change. This book is not changing anybody's zoning at all. It's just saying the regulations for your district after it is.
Mr. Garber?
It seems that many of the questions being asked are, what can go where? And it sounds like, particularly in regard to the neighborhood districts. So it seems the sooner that map that defines existing neighborhoods is finished, the better off it would be, because that way someone can see whether or not this concept of neighborhood districts is appropriate, because someone could look and see they have SF6 next door to them and down the street, but going the other way, a developer might buy 6 lots that are SF6 and put in a request for a neighborhood district. Now, can that happen? I guess what I'm hearing is it can't happen if it's defined as an existing neighborhood, but we don't know that yet without that map. Is that?
Okay, so the map that we have right now is the preferred scenario map, the comprehensive plan. And if you're in an existing neighborhood, yes, right now, the process stays the same for rezoning as it is now. If somebody buys a piece of property that's SF6 and they would like to do another type of development other than what they're allowed to do under SF6, they would come in and ask you all for a new zoning district. The thing that is different is that before, they could ask for districts that are not compatible, that don't have those caps. They could ask for a PDD. They could ask for something that is far exceeding what is actually at the scale that's appropriate for that neighborhood. What we've done with CodeSMTX is limited those options. Now, what they can request is, there are caps. There's a scale that's capped off. It's not, if you have a bunch of acreage, you could do, a huge thing. So that's what's changed, is that we've capped the options now.
Well, yes and no. I mean, in here it does say neighborhood districts are intended for infill or redevelopment in mixed residential or commercial areas within existing neighborhood areas. So I guess that's the part that seems a little bit confusing.
So what that means there is that if there is an area that, like I was talking about before, we have a lot of areas that are in existing neighborhood areas on the comprehensive plan that are lots of different zoning. So when you look at the zoning, current existing zoning in those areas, it's super colorful. There's a whole lot of different zoning districts going on in one area. And so in those places, those zoning districts, the duplexes and the townhouses that are built under that use-based code are not compatible with the buildings around them, because there's a lot of things that aren't working in those. And those districts also, that super colorful mix, it doesn't represent the character of that area. A townhouse could be anything like we talked about before. A townhouse could be anything from a whole lot of development to 3 side by side or something like that. So I guess, so that's the difference, is that in these mixed areas or along a commercial corridor, the choices are limited, and the choices are limited to that scale that the community has discussed through this whole process.
Councilmember Houston.
I think my question kind of is similar to Mr. Garber's. Will we retain SF 116.15?
Yes.
So what about infill in an SF district? What would be allowed?
I mean,
Only the same?
single family, yes. Those districts don't go away. If you have a single family house surrounded by other single family houses, we're not proposing any zoning change. If somebody were to come in and ask, the only next most appropriate district closest to a SF6 is ND3. But when you look at the criteria to request ND3, which is the lowest of the residential districts allowed in existing neighborhoods, when you look at the criteria, it says that you should be asking for that in an area that's already mixed. So if it's not already mixed, staff would probably not support that type of request, and the Planning Commission has that criteria, as well as City Council. So it's not that people can't ask for zoning, they still can, but.
Okay, that's exactly what I was looking at, because we're talking about neighborhood districts. It clearly says are intended for infill or redevelopment in mixed residential or commercial areas. So what I was trying to determine is, what about infill in a clearly single-family, generally larger lot neighborhood? What limits and what protects that neighborhood?
Well, we would not be changing, we're not proposing to change any of those zoning districts. So, I mean, the people still have due process to come and ask for something different. But the code doesn't recommend those changes, and nor would staff. So there's criteria in there that doesn't recommend them.
Did you just say that we're protected and that there's a limit on what someone can ask for and it's got to be something that's similar?
Yes, because those,
Where is that? Where do I find that in this code?
yes. It's gonna be right here. It's gonna be in,
What page?
Well, I'm talking about
yes, it's the pages that you're on right there.
the building types allowed by district or the zoning regulations?
What page is that on?
Right. Yeah, and that was my question, is when will we look at this in detail? Because there's things allowed and not allowed that concern me on that. 412 building types allowed by district.
Page what? 412. Page 412.
So
414.
So that table right there shows that once you have that zoning district, it shows what building types are allowed. In terms of your question of what can I request, that goes to the criteria on the, if you flip
Right,
right,
2 pages.
yes.
But I have concerns about some of the things that are marked as allowed and
Sure.
some things that aren't allowed that looks to me like would be consistent with your definitions. At what point will we be looking at that table in detail to talk about making changes?
Well, I think that the purpose of this meeting here is to raise those questions, and you can, raise that. If that's something that you'd like to take more of a detailed look at, and that's something that if the council and commission so chooses, we can bring forward as in a separate meeting to look into detail on that table.
That's why I was asking when that would happen, because I know it's not today.
Sure.
I just want to know when.
We don't have a date established for that table right now.
Thank you.
If that's something you guys would like to do.
I have one quick question.
Okay, I want to go to Mrs. Rand, who's been waiting, and when you speak, put it right up near your mouth where the audience won't hear your question.
So, the new mechanism for, scale is per lot size? Is that what you said, that it was a cap on units per lot size?
No, it's actually a cap of 20, it's both. So you have a cap of the number of
Per
units.
lot.
Yes, you have a number of units per lot, but you also have dwelling units an acre. So you have both.
Is there ever a problem between, well, I suppose the second mechanism would kick in. My concern was, are large multifamily, complexes ever built on multiple adjacent lots without being formally concatenated into a single lot? So that you could have a uniform structure and something that behaves socially like a cohesive lot, but is legally on several different lots and isn't kicking that mechanism.
Yes, so that would be something that we would be, that we need to be careful of when we're looking at rezoning large areas. Some of the things that, what really helps though about having individual lots is that now on that one lot, you're gonna have setbacks from building to building, so you start to see more gaps, along the street edge between the different lots. And then you also have, all of your parking for that lot is handled on, for those buildings are handled on that lot, as well as just the ability to have a more refined zoning district. So it really helps to keep things at a smaller scale in general, as opposed to having one big 20-acre lot, you have several smaller lots.
You know how when we were doing the short-term rentals, there was a requirement that within a given radius, you could only have one within a given radius? Would it be possible to do that sort of thing for some of these smaller multifamily units so that they can't be too close to each other, so that you can't have a whole group of these?
Yeah, so the way you would do that is through your zoning and through mapping those zoning districts. So we would want to be careful when we were looking at new zoning requests, as well as if the city chooses to go through a city-initiated process, we would want to be careful not to zone large swaths of area under one zoning district like that, so that you really saw that refinement and more of a breakout. So that we would do that through mapping.
Okay, we we have one more question on this issue, and then we're gonna get to our,
Okay, the table on page 4:5, where it says where these different districts can go. For neighborhood districts are only preferred in two places. One is in corridors, which you find, and then the other place preferred is existing neighborhood, and that's the part that confuses.
Yes, so what that means, what that table means is that if I have a property in an existing neighborhood and I want to ask for a rezoning, I am not allowed to ask for a character district because those have not been developed for existing neighborhoods. The neighborhood districts have. One of the next thing that we're going to get to is neighborhood character. So I'm going to talk about some of the other things that are particular about neighborhood districts that are different from character districts or special districts, which are things like your, totally use-based, industrial, heavy commercial, those sort of larger format buildings. So nobody can ask for those big, large format buildings, and nobody can ask for character districts within existing neighborhoods. They can also, but preferred is also conventional, I think, right? So you can ask for conventional residential and neighborhood districts.
Yeah, one more topic, two more comments on this. Change setbacks to allow infill housing development. And the second comment, cap on proximity of multifamily units in areas of stability. All right, so what I'm gonna do, I'll grab any stickies if I see them on this topic, but we do want to do them right on time. We're gonna move to the next topic, and the next topic is actually on neighborhood character.
Okay, so with this one, we've actually talked about a lot of the things that are going to come up in this this next item, neighborhood character. Some of the big things that come with this this topic are really talking about some of the big things that we heard around retaining neighborhood character are encouraging the retaining home ownership and really promoting home ownership within these existing neighborhoods, as well as looking at buffers and transitions when we move from those high-intensity comprehensive plan areas. So we have several of these preferred high-intensity zones on our comprehensive plan that are sometimes directly abutting existing neighborhood areas. That's something that we have seen more recently in the downtown, particularly as you go down LBJ and Guadalupe streets towards I-35. That area there is all part of our high-intensity downtown district. And so really looking at, right now, we don't have any protections in our code that protects lots that are adjacent to those high-intensity type nodes. So what we're doing is we're introducing and proposing new standards that would include things like transitions, buffers, height step downs, and requirements for transportation and traffic so that access needs to be taken from those larger streets that are the main corridors and can't go through neighborhoods to any kind of larger intensity uses. And then the other thing that we're proposing specifically in certain areas, particularly like those areas, that's one of the areas that we heard a lot from the public about, is looking at maximum lot sizes. And so maximum lot sizes are a little bit different from minimum lot sizes. One thing that does, particularly when you've got a really high intensity development area, is that it restricts your ability to do a parking garage so that everything stays surface parked. Well, that really starts to limit the intensity of the development there, particularly in those specific areas where you're abutting single-family neighborhoods. So that's an example of a transition. Those are the things that we're really looking at in this code and adding are transitions, buffers. We're adding buffers and transitions in several areas and based on different things. One of the things that we can do, even through our use chapter in chapter 5, is that we can add transitions and buffers related to the type of use. So we can add transitions and buffers between different uses, even within the same zoning district. We can add transitions and buffers between different zoning districts, which we have proposed, and we can add compatibility standards is what it's called, even within a district, within a neighborhood, so that if you are putting infill development, for example, into a neighborhood where all of the houses are smaller, 1 story, you want to build a 2-story structure, there are some limits there on how tall your building wall can be next to that smaller residential home that's next to it.
Abby, when we're talking about buffer zones and transition zones and uses, typically we're talking about uses and density and compatibility. Are we also going to be discussing in the code uses as commercial uses as you're starting to leave commercial zones and get into different districts or neighborhood districts? What those commercial uses will be allowable as well, and not just so much the height, the size?
Absolutely.
Scale?
Yes, absolutely. We have a whole chapter 5, our whole use chapter with the land use matrix, and all of that remains. So there are specific uses that are allowed within commercial districts. So yes, absolutely.
And with that, maybe not even allowing certain CUPs during those transition zones as well, so we don't, like, we're trying to quit not creating predictability and not drag people through processes, so.
Right.
Would be an area where we say we're not even allow the option for CUPs in these transition zones for X, Y, and Z?
Yes, that's absolutely a possibility, and we can do that in that use chapter. We have, they're called limited uses. So by using those limited uses, you can say things like, this particular use is limited by the fact that it can't be adjacent to single-family residential, or things like that. So yes, that is a possibility. So these are some of the things that we heard. One of the other big things that we heard, and really goes back to the comprehensive plan as well, is property maintenance. San Marcos has a really high proportion of rental property versus owned property. And that's something that we have really worked to try to address in this code. One of the big things that we're going to be proposing, I heard some questions came up before on the last item about owner occupancy regulations. Those are proposed to exist, or currently to stay in place as they are now. And we're also proposing to expand those into those new neighborhood districts. So the same occupancy restrictions apply in neighborhood districts. They do not apply, however, in character districts in the preferred development areas. So that's another great way that we can have the, show the difference between existing neighborhood areas and character districts. The other big requirement is for registration and rental registration. And that's something that we are proposing with the new neighborhood districts. We're doing that on the basis that we heard a whole lot about some of the challenges that San Marcos faces with the high number of rental properties. San Marcos currently, when you look at the American Community Survey, it looks like we've got 70% of our homes and 70% of the housing households are renter households, somewhere close to there. And state of Texas average is more like 30%. So we really do have a much higher percentage of rental properties in San Marcos, and so one of the things that we're proposing, now that new rental registration would only be applicable in the new neighborhood district. So it wouldn't be something that goes on the ground everywhere in existing neighborhoods. It would only be if somebody comes in and requests for a new neighborhood district, they're getting a little bit more flexibility, right, in the types of housing products. Some of those housing products may have shared space, like the cottage style, and we really need to make sure that we know who the property owners are, who the HOAs are, and be able to keep up with that in the maintenance of those properties, particularly as we put different types of housing. So that's a big piece of this one and a key consideration. I've kind of already talked about all of these proposed strategies as I've been talking. Just looking to see if there's anything that I missed. One of the other requirements that's in there in terms of the cottage style housing is that we are requiring that anytime there is shared space that's on a private lot, that there be an HOA or some other private property owner association to deal with that, as well as them being registered so the city can keep up with those people.
Clarification, for neighborhood districts, there would be mandatory rental registration then, is that what you're saying? Is that what you're proposing?
Yes, ma'am. We're proposing that, yes, ma'am.
Okay, so the topic is neighborhood character. The question is, what do you want to see the new code do to address this topic? Reading them to y'all. City should be a party to the HOAs for enforcement. Maximize rental registration opportunities. Alcohol CUP restrictions in transition zones, i.e. the Gumby's level of CUP would be allowed as a max. No parking garages in transition zones. Clear definition for enforcement. How, when, why. Require long/wide transition areas and buffers. Do not allow multifamily housing nor commercial in residential neighborhoods. Commercial alcohol use in appropriate locations as identified in transition areas as well as operation hours. We've got uses, enforcement. I think I'm reading this right. Remit uses.
Limit.
What?
Limit.
Oh, limit, okay. Limit uses in transition and buffer areas based on character studies. Transition zones, so enforcement uses transition zones. These are some of the big themes. Need a full review of alcohol CUP process. Concern about building step down, not enough. And other questions. So the idea here is to get the big ideas out, kind of see how they fall into buckets, but also as you've done, you've had other questions on the topic. We've got about 15 minutes before the break, so we do have some time to work this topic a little further on neighborhood character. Going once, going twice. We might take a break a little early, because I know we've got some other